All right, so guys, welcome to 4.2, looking at transport in vascular plants. Let's jump into it. Okay, now, in order for us to talk about plants and how plants transport things around, we need to start by looking at photosynthesis, okay? So, photosynthesis is the chemical process where you get carbon dioxide and water, and using the energy from sunlight, you're going to convert them into glucose and oxygen, glucose being a type of sugar, okay? So here's the chemical equation. 6CO2 plus 6H2O with light gives you C6H12O6 plus 6O2. Just a bunch of 6s, 12s, and 2s, okay? The process occurs within the leaf of the plant, which is the main photosynthetic organ, right? And since plants can produce their own food, we consider them as autotrophs. The word autotroph means self-nourishment, auto meaning self, automatic means, kind of self-run, and trophic means nourishment. So in order for the plant to photosynthesize, it needs the following aspects, okay? It needs sunlight, where it captures it through the cells in the leaf, in the chloroplast, containing the pigment chlorophyll, okay? It needs carbon dioxide, which is going to enter through the leaf, enter into the leaf through the stomata, which is a little opening, and it's going to need water, which enters through the roots and travels to the leaves, okay? In turn, the leaf is going to produce sugar and oxygen. Sugar is used to be broken down for cellular respiration, which we looked at in chapter 2, and building the cells and the rest of the plant as it grows, okay? The oxygen is used also for respiration, and any byproduct that is available is also then removed through the leaf, which we are very thankful for. Okay, so here's a diagram of a typical plant kind of photosynthesizing and what it needs. Okay, so it's going to grab water from the ground along with some minerals, and then it's going to use sunlight on its leaves, which then is going to produce glucose and oxygen. The oxygen goes in through the stomata, and then the chloroplast is the main organelle that's green, allowing the plant to photosynthesize. Okay. So if you think about the plant structure and how the plants are structured, it is all structured to, in a way, maximize photosynthesis as much as possible, okay? So each part of the plant plays an important role, and there are 3 parts to a typical plant, okay? And when I say typical, you got to take it with a grain of salt, because there are some types of plants that are either missing or modified these components, okay? So the one that we are talking about of interest is the leaf, which is the photosynthetic organ, and often leaves are flat and wide to grab as much sunlight and grab as much surface area to volume ratio as possible in order to maximize photosynthesis and its efficiency of doing that, okay? Now, from the leaf, you have the stem, which then supports the plant, but also transport a lot of that water to the leaf, and also transport the glucose and the nutrients that the cell has produced from the leaf down to the other parts of the plant, okay? And then you have the roots, and the roots provide structural support by keeping it upright, and then also absorbs water and minerals from the soil, and parts of the root also contain these root hairs, which are kind of like extensions of their cells, which allow them to then once again maximize surface area to volume ratio. So once again, surface area to volume ratio reappearing in key concepts in biology, okay? So here's your plant. There's the roots, there's the root hair coming out of it, and there's examples of the root hair right there. And then you can see there, as it kind of moves up its way through, the stem looks a little bit something like this. Remember previously we said that, the outer layer is the growing part, the meristem, and then you've also got some of the transport bundles inside there, which we will talk about soon, okay? The leaf, if you take a cross section of the leaf, you kind of get this beautiful looking section here containing various photosynthetic components of your leaf, as well as your transport bundle, and then see the little stomata, that little 2 coffee bean shaped openings, which allow carbon dioxide to go in. And ironically, actually, it also allows some water to go out, because the plant has to lose some water in order to use water. Now, the tissues in plants, it's there as well, but it just kind of often not immediately to mind, because we're not as familiar with plants as we are with animals. But there are basically 3 types of tissues, okay? You've got vascular tissue, which is what this chapter is really about, which are designed for transporting water and nutrients. You then have ground tissue, which are the non-growing parts that provide structure and support. like, for example, the wood, which is often dead in trees. And then you also have the dermal tissue, and the dermal tissue is that meristem layer that is growing on the outer parts of the plant, okay? And here's a diagram showing each of those things there. There's your vascular bundle containing the different parts, and then the outer layer would be the meristem, that would be the growing part, or the dermal layer, okay? Plants also have organs. They're less recognized, but they also have different types of organs. The roots can be considered an organ because it's designed to absorb minerals and water from the soil. The stem transports water to the leaves, and then also the leaves are organs as well as the flowers, okay? And then when we think about systems, we are really only thinking about two particular systems in the plant. You've got your shoot system, and then you've got your root system. Basically, the shoot system is everything that is on top, the leaves, the stem, and the growing parts, and the fruits and flowers, whereas the root system is the part that is underground, designed for support, okay? And here's an example of a few plants with their roots and shoot systems there. Okay, how did this idea of vascular plants come about? Well, vascular plants are a particular type of plant, actually. They're a group of plants that have specialized tissues called vascular tissues that allow them to transport water, minerals, and nutrients, okay? This is what a vascular tissue looks like, and all of these form what we call a vascular bundle containing these particular parts here. And actually, vascular plants are one of the later renditions of plants that have come along. So if you look at the history of plants, very fascinatingly, the origin of plants would have kind of come from algae or these kind of charophytes. And the first land plants would have been your mosses or bryophytes, right? And mosses, kind of just look like a clump of green stuff on the ground, are plants, right? They can photosynthesize, but they don't have a lot of specialized tissue the way that other plants that came after them did, okay? After that, your earlier vascular plants that developed from mosses were actually your ferns. Ferns were the first seeded plants which were able to produce a seed and then distribute that particular seed to form more ferns. So there's an example of a fern there. And then after the ferns came what we call your conifers or your pines, and they are your gymnosperms, right? And they are seeded ones, right? With a kind of a shell around the seed and a developing husk of some sort, right? And conifers and pines are very widespread and really hardy kind of plants, and they actually correlate really well. Also, their presence coincide really well with a lot of dinosaurs, and so you often find pines and gymnosperms where you find dinosaurs and things like that. And then the last group of plants that came along were actually angiosperms, which are your flowering plants, right? And the flowering, the development of the organ that flower, is actually quite a remarkable kind of evolutionary feature, which allows plants to then capitalize off vectors like insects to carry pollen and then increase in their genetic diversity, okay? So vascular plants broke off somewhere around here, around the 400 million mark. And they were your ferns, your gymnosperms, and your angiosperms, yeah? Okay, now we're going to take a look at vascular tissue, okay? So what is vascular tissue? They're the defining trait of vascular plants, and there are two types of vascular tissue. You've got xylem, which transports water and mineral ions absorbed from the soil up the plant and towards the leaves. And then you've got the phloem, which transport dissolved sugars produced by the leaves to other areas of the plants, and the phloem also transports amino acids, right? And so, you know, you got one that basically does water and mineral, and then you got one that does nutrients, okay? They look kind of different between the roots, the stems, and the leaves. Okay, so here's what a typical xylem vessel looks like. It looks like there's a giant tube with these kind of little sections where water passes through them. And then the phloem look like these kind of compartments with little filters through them that nutrients can either move up or down depending on the cell and the type of vessel it is. Here's what it looks like under the microscope. And your phloem are your little ones, and then the xylem are the really big ones. And you got a few different types of xylem, which I'll explain later, okay? And here are the root structures of them between the stem, the leaf, and the root. They all look a little bit different, but they all essentially do the same particular function. Okay, let's start with the xylem. Okay, so xylem tissue are responsible for the transport of water and minerals. Really important for a particular process called transpiration. Transpiration is the water movement up a plant. Now, I'm very intentional with the word up because water only moves up the plant and up around the branches towards the leaves, and transpiration moves in the upward direction. Okay, so xylem tissue are composed of two particular types. You've got xylem vessels and you've got tracheads. Okay, so the xylem vessels are long water-filled tubes that are joined end to end. Okay, the pores or the pits at the end are hollow, much like a straw, and the mature xylem vessels have no nucleus or cytoplasm at all, and they're essentially dead, right? This is really fascinating because you've got a vessel in the plant capable of transferring water that is dead. There is no energy in it at all. And so the whole process doesn't require any particular amounts of energy from the plant. Okay, so the cell wall in these xylem vessels are strengthened by coils of lignin, making them a lot stronger and far more rigid. Okay, and then here's an example of the vessels that are there, and you can see them, they're just stacked one top of each other like that. Okay, here are the vessels again, the really big stuff, they're the vessels, right? And then the little stuff, they're the tracheads, right? So the tracheads, they're long water-filled tubes and they're joined by overlapping ends. So in the diagram here, you can see these are the tubes and then these are the overlapping ends that kind of join together, and they look kind of like cells, really. The pores or the pits are alongside the tube as opposed to at the end of the tube, and the cell wall is strengthened by coils of lignin as well, making them stronger and rigid. So the structure of the lignin, it looks a little bit different between them, but once again, both serving very similar functions. Okay. Now let's talk about transpiration, because transpiration is a very fascinating part of the plant that helps explain a lot of the function of the plant and how plants move the water throughout it. Okay. How on earth do dead cells transfer water? That's a key feature because xylem vessels are essentially hollowed out and they're dead, which means the plant needs a way of getting that water from the roots up to the top mechanically, not using energy from the cell in any way whatsoever. There is a whole aspect of it. The entire process is passive, and it is composed of three very, very awesome physical processes. Here's a diagram of what it looks like. And it starts really from the roots, but the whole thing really happens simultaneously. Okay, so the first thing that you get is what we call root pressure. Okay, the roots and the cells within the root often have a higher solute concentration, and as a result, water is going to move in via osmosis because they are in a hypotonic environment. Okay, so the cells are in a hypertonic environment. Okay, so the water is going to move into the cells via osmosis, and it's going to travel into the transport vessels there. The root hairs maximize that particular process, but you can see it gets pushed in. Water getting pushed in is like a pump, right? That osmotic process is like creates a pressure, and it starts to pump water in through the roots. Now from there, two processes stop the xylem vessel water from falling back down. It is adhesion and cohesion, and they're physical process. They happen in the aspects of water. Okay, adhesion is the tendency for water to stick to objects like the side of the xylem. Okay, and then cohesion is the water sticking to itself. So the water is like this sticky network where, chemically speaking, is sticky, allowing it to attach to one another and then attach to the walls of the xylem vessels. Okay, and that is going to prevent water from moving down. And the main catch of this is that it only works when the xylem vessels are really quite thin. When they get too thick, there's too much weight and too much gravity in the water that pulls it back down. But when it's really thin, that adhesion cohesion process is very effective, meaning that these xylem vessels are really, really small and really, really thin. Okay. You can observe this phenomenon happen with straws. When you stick a straw in a drink or a cup, you immediately see some of the water drive up the straw, and then you'll notice that even when you pull the straw out, if the straw is thin enough, some of the water stays inside the straw because of that adhesion cohesion process. Okay. The final one, which drives the upper end of the plant, is what we call transpiration pool. Now, this happens in the leaves, right? And the water that is being evaporated from the leaf through the stomata right here, right? That leaving water, that's going to drag more water, create a little vacuum up here, And it's going to drag more water up from below along those xylem vessels. So that process, that driving up process, is pulled out the stomata, right? And so that's actually the suction force that draws water more up the plant, right? Now, the catch is, in order for the plant to use that water, it needs to release water through the stomata, and along the way, some of these water molecules then get used by the cell for photosynthesis, okay, or by the leaf for photosynthesis. So actually, plants therefore have to lose some water in order to draw more water from the ground up. And so you'll find that in deserts, for example, when plants can't lose too much water, they also have to slow down photosynthesis. So despite the fact that they live in the desert and there's abundant sunlight all around, the photosynthesis process is actually limited by water availability, because for the desert plants, in order for them to use some of that water, they need to release it into the environment. And if there's not a lot of water available, that process needs to slow down so it doesn't lose too much water, okay? Okay, let's take a look at phloem. So phloem tissues are responsible for the transport of glucose and other nutrients around the plant. And the process has a similar name, but a different one, okay? It is translocation. So transpiration is about the movement of water. Translocation is the movement of glucose, okay? And the movement of glucose and nutrients throughout the plant happens in these phloem vessels, okay? Phloem vessels, unlike xylem vessels, are actually alive, and therefore they have to use energy in order to translocate glucose and nutrients, and they have 4 different types of components in them, and it's quite a complex series of interaction that happens between them. Okay, you have your main compartment, which are what we call your sieve tubes. This is your sieve tube. They look like these giant kind of empty compartments, warehouses, right? And they're elongated cells, and they've got these little gaps between them, like a filter. And that's what the sugar moves in and out through. Okay. When the cell photosynthesizes, what it actually does is it creates glucose, but in order for the plant to transport that, it needs to convert the glucose into sucrose, which is another type of sugar. And so that sucrose is what moves around, and that forms the sap in plants. Okay, so it's all found within the sieve tubes, and then the sieve tubes are also accompanied by these cells called the parenchyma cells. Okay, so the parenchyma cells are next to them, and what they do is they actually photosynthesize and provide energy for the sieve tubes to actually then function. Okay, so those parenchyma cells are what kind of gives the stem its kind of greenish kind of feature, and plays a really important role in transporting the nutrients throughout the plant. Okay. And so that's why you always find phloem closer to the surface of the plant, just underneath the bark, where the sap is often leaking out. That's where you find the phloem tubes. Okay. Next to the sieve tubes and the parenchyma are the companion cells. These are the companion cells here, and they're like the control, right? They're a type of parenchyma cells, but they are also responsible for then providing that energy to the sieve tubes in order for them to move the nutrients up and down via active transport, and then they also control and regulate that movement as well. And then finally, you have what we call the Sclerenchyma cells, which are the thick cell walls, cells that have thick cell walls and provide that extra structure of support, and so they pack into the phloem. And so the phloem, they're multiple and they're packed all together, allowing that process to happen. Okay. Now, finally, we're going to talk about leaf structure and how leaves are designed to maximize this particular process. Okay, so here are all of the different aspects of the leaf, and this was covered sometime in your earlier years, looking at year 10 or year 9. I can't remember which one. But the components of the leaf kind of happen in these particular layers. Okay, so here is the diagram of what it looks like, and the top of the leaf and the bottom of the leaf actually look slightly different for most plants, except for a few other particular ones, like for example eucalyptus plants look exactly the same on both sides, but most plants look a little bit different from the top to the bottom. Okay, you have the starting layer. The first one is actually the upper epidermis layer. That is this particular layer here. The epidermal meaning thinking like outer skin, dermal meaning skin, epi meaning outside. So the outer layer is covered in a waxy cuticle that is designed to prevent water loss. the epidermis is often also transparent, allowing sunlight to pass through the epidermal layer and into the next layer, for it to photosynthesize. And so other features also, some leaves in the upper epidermis also have leaf hairs, which are designed to kind of either trap air or be glossy or make it really difficult for insects to walk over as a form of defense. The next layer is the mesophyll layer, which are composed of two components. You've got your palisade mesophills, and then you got the spongy mesophills, okay? The palisade, they are stacked vertically. They look like these little vertically stacked columns, and they're chocked full of chloroplast, meaning they are designed to photosynthesize, and they are the main photosynthetic component of your leaf, right? So here's a leaf. Up here, there's your upper epidermis layer, and then there is your palisade mesophyll, okay? And you see there, these elongated cells are designed to maximize photosynthesis, okay? After the palisade mesophyll is the spongy mesophyll, and the spongy mesophyll also photosynthesize, but they're spongy and they have lots and lots of gaps in between them, and these gaps make a great compartment for air to move in and out of the leaf. So actually a lot of part of the leaf is actually just empty space filled with gases, right? And so the spongy mesophyll allow gas exchange to occur between the palisade and the transport vessels, okay? That transport vessel, that vascular bundle, contains the xylem and the phloem. So all of the water and the minerals come in through the xylem vessels there, and then kind of evaporate through the spongy mesophyll as it makes its way down into the stomata, which is the opening. And then all of the carbon dioxide will go through the stomata and transport into the cells for photosynthesis. There, once it creates the glucose, it's going to then transport that glucose into the phloem vessels, which then translocate it elsewhere needed by the plant. And any excess oxygen will then get released also through the stomata of the plant or of the leaf as well, okay? And then at the bottom, you have your lower epidermal layer, okay? Now, that stomata, that stomatal opening, they are key openings within the leaf, and they're speckled in the bottom of the leaf or the top of the leaf, depending on which type of leaf you're talking about. And they are what allows gases to move in and out, right? So the stomata are designed for gas exchange, and they have these two kind of coffee bean cells called guard cells, which are going to regulate the opening and closing of the pore depending on how much water is available. So the more water is available, the more the stomata is likely to open, and then the less water is available, the more likely they are to shut. And so the leaf regulates its own water availability based on that, okay? Now, looking at the conditions for gas exchange, so thinking about that stomatal opening, when the conditions are really good, that means that there's lots of sunlight and lots of water. That stomatal opening is going to open up, right? The guard cells become what we call turgid. Turgid means it gets plump and it's full of water, okay? And the opening of the stomata allows H2O to leave the leaf, which is then going to draw more water from underneath. So there's the water going up the root, and it's going to leave some of the leaf, and as it leaves, it's going to draw more water through the xylem and into that airspace between the spongy mesophyll. And then, at the same time, the opening of the stomata then allows carbon dioxide to also enter into the leaf as well. And then that will kickstart the photosynthesis process when sunlight is available, okay? Photosynthesis is going to occur, and then the glucose is then going to be translated through the phloem to the rest of the plant. And then any excess oxygen is then also going to exit the leaf as well, right? And so when the leaf is photosynthesizing, you should expect carbon dioxide levels to go go into the leaf. You should expect oxygen levels to go out of the leaf and up in the atmosphere. And then you should also expect water levels to actually also exit the leaf as well. Now, when the conditions are poor, on the other hand, when there's no sunlight or in drought condition, the stomatal is going to, the opening is going to close and the guard cells turn flaccid, right? Flaccid means they relax, right? And so that relaxing of the cells then keeps it shut, right? And then you're going to get little or no movement of H2O or CO2 exchange, and therefore no photosynthesis and no growth, which is what happens in desert plants, okay? Eventually though, the plant needs to, keep respiring and needs to then use cellular respiration, and you're going to get oxygen going into the leaf as the leaf respires, and then CO2 leaving the leaf as it respires as well. So actually that's a lot like animals. So at night, when there's no photosynthesis, plants are going to take up oxygen around it and release carbon dioxide, much like animals do. So actually, sometimes it's not great to leave plants in a jar or something like that if you don't let them photosynthesize, because eventually they're going to run out of oxygen in the jar. Okay, so here's a diagram showing all of that. So at the light, you get O2 out, CO2 in, and then at nighttime you get O2 in and CO2 out. Okay, so that's it for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will see you guys in the next video.